Well, welcome back. My name is Jim Kaseman. We're talking about how to get to know God intimately. And of course, the only way you can do that is just examine the scriptures from Genesis to Revelation and see how God, find out how God thinks and why he does what he does. And so we've covered quite a bit of ground in recent weeks, talking about redemption, the crucifixion, the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus. Now, we want to go back and we want to, first of all, we want to talk about the 5 offerings in the Mosaic law, and the sin offering, trespass offering, the burnt offering, the meal offering, and the peace offering. And again, using the scriptures that we've been using for some time now, for quite a few weeks, and that is Luke chapter 24 and verse 44, and Jesus is speaking, and then he said to them, "This is what I told you while I was still with you. Everything which is written concerning me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms must be fulfilled." All right, so in the old covenant, or the old blood covenant, or the Abrahamic covenant, or just the old covenant, the Old Testament we call it, there are over 300 scriptures that are referring to Jesus, kind of in shadow form or in type and shadow. And of course, we know that the everything in the old is all just symbolism. It's not the real thing, but it's pointing to the real thing, which is Jesus, who would come along, some 4,000 years after Adam and Eve. And Jesus said, everything that is said about me in the old, I have to fulfill it. All right, so he's the real thing. All right, now, he has to fulfill these 5 offerings. And so we want to take a look at them, see how they are in the old, and then bring it over into the new and see how it applies to us today. So the first one, of course, is the what's called the sin offering. Now, the sin offering, like I said before, and the trespass offering, they are both mandatory. I mean, if you're going to walk with God, these 2 have to be done first. And then the burnt offering, meal offering, and peace offering, these are all voluntary, and it has to do with praise and worship and thanksgiving. That's voluntary. All right, so they deal with worship. So the sin offering and the trespassing offering, as we'll see, are really pretty similar. But first of all, the sin offering, again, is mandatory, and it has to do with our position with Christ. Now, I was, for the first 29 years of my life, I had never read the Bible. I didn't know anything about God. I had never asked Jesus into my heart. I was not born again. I was not a believer, although I went to a large, dead denomination. I was raised in a denomination, but that was the preacher's job to read the Bible and all that stuff. And I don't ever remember them telling me that I had to ask Jesus to come into my heart. And so then finally, as I've said before, the neighbors, when we were April 1972, Kathleen and I both 29 years old at the time, we were invited to a neighborhood Bible study, and that's when the gospel was presented to us. And then we had a decision to make. Do we want to ask Jesus to come into our heart or not? Well, we made a decision to come into our heart. Now, before we asked Jesus to come into our heart, we were unsaved, and we were on our way to hell. So we had no position with God. Remember in 1 John 3, and I guess we would be coming right on down here now. I just have to look at it real quick. I want to make sure I give the right verse to you. Let me get to 1 John 3. Come on, Peter, get out of the way. All right, 1 John 3, and it would be 8. Okay. He who sins is of the devil, for the devil has sinned from the beginning. For this purpose the Son of God was manifested, that he might destroy the works of the devil. And then in verse 9, whoever has been born of God does not sin, for his seed remains in him, and he cannot sin because he's been born of God. Verse 10, in this the children of God and the children of the devil are manifested. All right, so we are human spirits clothed with flesh. So in the spiritual family of God, or in the spiritual realm, I should say, of the billions of human spirits that have come into this world, you can divide them into two classes. There are those who are the children of the devil. They're disobedient to God. They love sin. They're in sin. They lie, steal, cheat, whatever. It was part of our nature. We were children of the devil. Then those who have received redemption through Jesus Christ and ask him to come into their heart to be Lord and Master, then what Colossians 1:13 says, that we are taken from the power of darkness, transferred to the kingdom of the Son of Love, as born again, regenerated human spirits. So now we've switched families. So when Kathleen and I asked Jesus to come into our heart on April 4th of 1972 in that Bible study, when we did that, then immediately we switched families. We no longer were children of the devil. We now became children of God, babes in Christ. And so we switched families. So there's only two families: children of the devil, children of God. And so I made a choice to become part of the family of God, along with my wife, Kathleen. Now, the only way we could do that, if Jesus had not come to provide redemption for us, then ultimately, we would have died, our bodies would have died, and we would have ended up going to hell. But because we had sinned, and we had the nature of sin, and so the wages of sin is death, we were dead spiritually and separated from God. We'll come back here again to Ephesians in chapter 2, chapter 2, and verse 1. And you, Jim Kaseman, he made alive, who were dead in trespasses and sins. So before we asked Jesus to come into our heart, we were spiritually dead, separated from God, and our destiny was hell. Now, there's a penalty for sin. The wages of sin is death, separation from God, and eternity in hell. Now, I couldn't save myself. I had the nature of sin. I was a slave to sin. I was a slave to Satan. I couldn't save myself. Nobody could. And so that's why then, before the beginning of time, God already had in his heart that he'd take on the form of a human being literally in every respect before the ages of time began, according to the scriptures. He had this plan. He knew man couldn't save himself. And so he had a plan. He himself then would come and take on the form of a human being, and he would go to hell for us and pay the penalty for us. Now, isn't that something? All right? Now, man had to go to hell because man sinned. God couldn't go to hell because he didn't sin. And so God had to take on the form of a human being, literally in every respect, and then go to hell for us. Now, that's something to think about. Why would he go to hell for us? God has always existed. He's never depended on his creation for his existence. He's got it made. I mean, think of it. There's no devil, no sin, or nothing in heaven, or I shouldn't say that, but at any rate, he's got it made. Now, why would he want to take a chance of coming in the form of a man, literally in every respect, and then by faith be tempted in all points even as we are, and by faith be willing to go to hell and believe that after 3 days and 3 nights the demands of justice would be met and he would be resurrected? He had to do all of that by faith. Now, if he had yielded to any of the temptations, then he would have sinned as a man. But remember now, he's God who took on the form of a man. So as a man, if he'd have sinned, it'd be like God sinning. And God would become unholy, and everything would fall apart. There'd be no heaven, nothing. It'd all be over with. There'd be no heaven to go to. And that's something to think about. But our time is up. We'll continue with that thought in our next session. Meanwhile, be blessed in everything you set your hands to do.